While Japan and Taiwan do not have formal diplomatic relations, Abe was seen as a staunch supporter of Taiwan in the face of China's rising aggression. He was popular among politicians and the public, many of whom paid tribute at a memorial set up at the de facto Japanese embassy in Taipei. For over a century, Taiwan and Japan have shared a close link, but one which has left a complicated legacy. While many remember the injustices of Japan's 50 years of colonial rule, others look back on the era with nostalgia. For a deeper look at Taipei-Tokyo relations, our reporter Ryan Ho Kilpatrick spoke with historian James Lin of the University of Washington.
Do you think it's fair to say that a lot of this goodwill comes from a certain degree of nostalgia about the age of Japanese rule as well?
Probably the largest factor still is the more contemporary one, which is that Abe has been a very vocal proponent of Taiwan on the international stage. But I do think that there's this strand of Taiwanese society that feels a great deal of affinity. And I think it goes back to the 90s. Under Kuomintang rule, Japan was demonized as kind of this colonial power that was rapacious and didn't treat Taiwan very well. But with democratization, starting in the 90s, especially in the 2000s, with the opening up of the education curriculum, there became a more public space for revisiting Taiwan's history under Japanese colonial rule. An opportunity to be nostalgic about that period, because that was the period when Japanese rule was kind of at its most thriving in terms of the economy, in terms of the safety that it offered for Taiwanese people. And so I think that part of that affinity continues into how Taiwanese society sees important Japanese political figures like Abe.
What do you think it is about that era that people look back fondly upon, despite all the implications of being colonial subjects at the time?
Part of it has to do with the generational divide. That a good example that was raised by a number of scholars is Lee Teng-hui, who was the first freely elected president of Taiwan. Lee Teng-hui is someone who has been very public about his affinity for Japanese rule. He's of that generation. He was a teenager when he was living under Japanese rule, went to secondary higher education in Japan, and he came back as an adult to Taiwan, and then he was met with Kuomintang rule. And Kuomintang rule was very repressive during that period. And people like Lee, they kind of remember their youth being something that was, Taiwan had economically prospered. It was a very safe society. And then all of a sudden they were met by this very repressive regime. And so I think that a lot of it has to do with a certain kind of memory about, what it was like when you were a teenager during these kind of the halcyon or the best part of Japanese rule. And then you meet the worst part of Kuomintang rule that immediately follows it.